The morning air at the training base was thick with the smell of salt water and sweat, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon as the recruits lined up in perfect formation on the cold asphalt. Among them stood Riley Carter, her jaw set and her shoulders squared even as her muscles trembled from the previous day's drills. She had been in training for 3 weeks, but already she felt the weight of every sneer and muttered insult thrown her way. Most of the recruits were men, and many of them had made it clear that they didn't think she belonged here. She was smaller than most of them, leaner, and though her eyes held a quiet strength, the others saw only weakness. Riley didn't correct them. She knew something they didn't, something she had sworn never to reveal, not unless she had no other choice. She had grown up in a world where Navy SEAL tactics were as natural to her as breathing. Her father had been a decorated SEAL, a man who had trained her in secret since she was old enough to walk, teaching her how to fight, how to survive, how to outthink and outmaneuver opponents who underestimated her. She kept that part of herself buried deep, because standing out now would only draw more fire. But today, as the drill instructor barked orders and the group jogged toward the obstacle course, she had a feeling that hiding might no longer be an option. The course was designed to break people, thick ropes strung high between towers, walls slick with mud, narrow beams over freezing water, all arranged in a brutal sequence meant to test endurance and willpower. Riley had been doing well despite the others trying to box her out, slowing her down whenever they could, but today there was something different in the air. As they approached the first challenge, she caught the glance exchange between 3 of the strongest recruits, led by a broad-shouldered man named Dalton. He had been her loudest critic from day one, mocking her every time she stumbled, loudly questioning why someone like her was even allowed to train with them. Now his smirk was sharper, more dangerous. The drill instructor blew the whistle and they were off, sprinting through the mud. Riley kept her focus forward, legs pumping, heart steady. She cleared the first hurdle easily, swinging herself over with a burst of speed, but when she landed, Dalton was suddenly in front of her, slowing his pace deliberately to block her path. She veered left, but another of his friends cut her off, forcing her to climb slower than she wanted. "Keep up, Carter," Dalton sneered over his shoulder. "Wouldn't want you falling behind." The others laughed. Riley clenched her teeth but said nothing. She knew their game, they wanted her to lash out, to lose control, to prove them right about her being weak. She breathed deeply, keeping her mind calm, but as they approached the rope climb, things escalated. Dalton scrambled up first, then hung there near the top, pretending to struggle while secretly kicking at her rope to make it swing wildly. Riley gritted her teeth and climbed with precision, remembering her father's words. 3 points of contact, always. Trust your grip, trust your body. She reached the top despite his sabotage, but as she began to swing to the next platform, one of the others reached out and deliberately shoved her shoulder. She lost her balance and fell hard into the mud below. Pain shot through her side and the air rushed from her lungs. For a split second, the world was muffled, the laughter above, the shouts of the drill instructor, the burn of humiliation boiling inside her. She rolled to her knees, her vision narrowing. That was when she saw Dalton glance down at her, grinning triumphantly. Something inside Riley snapped, not in anger but in cold, calculated clarity. If they wanted to corner her, they would find out what kind of predator they were dealing with. She rose slowly, mud dripping from her uniform, and began climbing again, but this time she let the mask slip just a little. Her movements were faster, sharper, every grip precise. She reached the top in record time and vaulted past Dalton before he realized what had happened. His face twisted in surprise, and for the first time Riley saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The next section was a balance beam over icy water. Dalton and his friends tried again to surround her, crowding her from both sides. As they moved, Riley's mind calculated every angle. Her father's training surged to the surface. Control the battlefield. Use their weight against them. Never fight where they are strongest, fight where they are weakest. She feigned a slip to lure Dalton closer, then pivoted with lightning speed, hooking her foot behind his ankle. He toppled backward into the freezing water with a splash. The others froze for a split second, startled, and Riley used that moment to sprint across the beam with perfect balance, her body moving like a predator in the wild. She didn't look back. By the time she reached the next obstacle, a towering wall slick with rainwater, the drill instructor was shouting commands furiously, his whistle blowing non-stop. He hadn't seen exactly what happened, only that the course was in chaos. Riley leapt at the wall, using a perfect combination of speed and leverage to vault to the top without hesitation. The crowd of recruits watching from the sidelines fell silent. She had just done in one move what most of them struggled to do with help. Dalton emerged from the water, sputtering with rage, and charged after her. He caught up near the final stretch, a gauntlet of swinging logs meant to knock trainees off balance. He lunged at her, intending to shove her aside, but Riley anticipated him perfectly. She shifted her weight, letting his momentum carry him forward, then slammed her palm into his chest in a precise strike that sent him sprawling into the mud again. This time there was no hiding what had happened. The recruits watching gasped, and even the drill instructor fell silent for a heartbeat. Riley didn't pause. She finished the course with flawless speed, crossing the finish line alone while the others scrambled behind her. She stood there, breathing hard but steady, her eyes scanning the field. Dalton struggled to his feet, covered in mud and humiliation, his rage barely contained. "You're dead, Carter," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You think you're tough? You're nothing." Riley met his gaze calmly, her expression unreadable. Inside, her blood was pounding, adrenaline roaring through her veins, but she didn't let it show. She had revealed just a fraction of what she was capable of, and already the balance of power had shifted. The drill instructor strode over, his face red with fury. "What the hell was that out there?" he demanded. Riley stood at attention, her voice steady. "Just following orders, sir. Complete the course. Don't quit." The instructor stared at her for a long moment, then barked at the others to line up. Dalton glared at her with murderous hatred, but there was fear there now too. Riley knew this wasn't over. They would come for her again, harder next time. But she also knew something else. They had made a mistake today. They had forced her hand, and now the predator inside her was awake. Riley stood at the edge of the training field, her chest still heaving from the brutal run, her eyes scanning the line of recruits as they gathered under the drill instructor's command. Mud clung to her uniform, dripping steadily onto the cold ground, but she didn't care. Her mind was sharp, clear, focused on every sound, every movement. Dalton stood 3 men down from her, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His glare burned into her, a promise of revenge that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. The other recruits were whispering among themselves, casting wary glances at her. Before today she had been the easy target, the outsider they could push around to make themselves feel stronger. Now, after what they had seen on the obstacle course, there was an edge of fear in their voices. The drill instructor's booming voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Carter. Front and center." Riley stepped forward immediately, boots crunching in the gravel, her spine straight and her hands locked at her sides. The instructor studied her with narrowed eyes, clearly trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. "Where the hell did you learn to move like that?" he demanded. Riley kept her face impassive, her tone respectful but firm. "Sir, just did what I was trained to do, sir." He didn't like the answer, but he couldn't call it insubordination. After a moment he barked, "Get back in line. The rest of you, listen up. This isn't a playground. You don't interfere with each other's progress on my course, or you'll answer to me. Understood?" A ragged chorus of "Yes, sir" followed, but Riley could feel Dalton's seething hatred radiating from him like heat. The rest of the day passed in a grueling blur of drills. The instructors seemed determined to break them all, pushing the recruits through endless sets of push-ups, runs, and tactical exercises. Riley kept her head down and her focus razor-sharp, moving with quiet efficiency. She didn't brag, didn't make eye contact, didn't give anyone a reason to single her out again. But she could feel the storm building behind her. Dalton and his 2 closest allies, Briggs and Harlow, stayed close together, whispering whenever the instructors' backs were turned. Riley didn't need to hear the words to know they were planning something. These men weren't just bullies, they were desperate to prove their dominance, and she had humiliated them in front of everyone. By nightfall, when the recruits were dismissed to their barracks, Riley was already preparing herself mentally. She knew they wouldn't wait long to strike. She had seen this pattern before, back when her father trained her to read danger in the smallest cues. Weak men struck in the dark when they thought no one was watching. Sure enough, as she made her way down the dimly lit corridor toward the women's barracks, Riley caught the faint scuff of boots behind her. Her pulse quickened, but her expression stayed neutral. She didn't turn her head or alter her pace, giving no sign that she had noticed. At the last possible second, just as a shadow lunged at her from the side, she spun with perfect timing. Dalton's arms swung through the empty air where her head had been a heartbeat earlier, and before he could recover, Riley drove her elbow into his ribs with a sharp, controlled strike. He staggered back, cursing as Briggs and Harlow appeared behind him. "You little," Dalton snarled, clutching his side. "You think you embarrassed me today? You don't belong here, Carter." We're going to make sure you understand that. Riley's stance shifted subtly, her weight balanced, ready for whatever came next. Walk away, Dalton, she said quietly. Her voice was calm, but there was a warning edge beneath it. You don't want to do this. Her refusal to show fear only enraged him further. Get her, he barked. Briggs lunged first, aiming a clumsy punch at her head. Riley sidestepped smoothly, grabbed his wrist, and used his momentum to flip him over her shoulder. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, gasping for air. Harlow came next, bigger and stronger but slower. Riley ducked under his swing and drove a precise kick into the back of his knee, sending him crashing down. Dalton hesitated, shock flickering across his face as he watched his allies fall in seconds. Then rage consumed him and he charged with a guttural roar. This time Riley didn't retreat. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, catching his wrist mid-swing and twisting it sharply. He howled in pain, dropping to one knee. She leaned in close, her voice low and lethal. I warned you. Then she released him, stepping back just as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Dalton scrambled to his feet, clutching his arm, and glared at her with pure hatred. This isn't over, he spat before retreating with Briggs and Harlow limping behind him. When the patrol passed by moments later, Riley was alone, standing perfectly still, her breathing controlled. They gave her a cursory glance and moved on, oblivious to what had just transpired. Back in her bunk, Riley sat in the darkness, letting the adrenaline ebb from her veins. She had tried to stay under the radar, but there was no hiding anymore. Dalton wouldn't stop, and sooner or later, his vendetta would spill into the open. Worse, if the instructors discovered the full extent of her abilities, questions would be asked, questions she wasn't ready to answer. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, if you ever reveal what you are, you'll never be free again. The world will either try to use you or destroy you. She clenched her fists, fighting down the surge of emotion. She hadn't come here to stand out. She had come here to prove to herself that she could earn her place, that she was more than just her father's legacy. But the battlefield didn't care about intentions. The next morning, the tension was palpable. Dalton's bruises were visible even beneath his uniform, and his glare followed her like a physical weight. During weapons training, Riley felt his eyes on her constantly, waiting for a chance to trip her up. She ignored him, focusing on the feel of the rifle in her hands, the rhythm of her breathing, the perfect alignment of her sights. When her turn came at the range, she hit every target dead center in rapid succession. The other recruits fell silent, murmurs rippling through the line. Even the instructor raised an eyebrow. Impressive, Carter, he said grudgingly. Riley gave a sharp nod but said nothing. The attention made her skin crawl. Dalton's jealousy burned hotter with every passing second, and she knew he was nearing his breaking point. That night, as the recruits prepared for lights out, Riley heard whispers spreading through the barracks. There was talk of a surprise night exercise, a simulated mission designed to test their ability to operate under extreme fatigue and stress. The instructors had hinted at it earlier, and now it seemed the time had come. When the alarm blared at midnight, Riley was already half-dressed, her boots laced tight. The recruits stumbled into formation, groggy and disoriented. The instructors handed out blank weapons and night vision goggles, explaining the rules. 2 teams, 1 objective, a mock infiltration of a guarded compound deep in the forest. Riley was assigned to Dalton's team. She saw the flicker of satisfaction on his face and knew immediately this was no coincidence. He would use the chaos of the exercise to take his revenge once and for all. As they moved silently through the darkness, the forest closing in around them, Riley stayed at the rear, watching every movement. Dalton led aggressively, pushing the pace, his voice a harsh whisper in the comms. Carter, keep up or stay out of the way, he snapped. She gave no response, conserving her energy, letting him think she was compliant. But inside, her instincts were on high alert. The mission was supposed to be simulated, but she felt the danger coiling tighter with every step. When they reached a narrow ravine, Dalton suddenly signaled for a halt. We'll take a short cut, he said, his tone deceptively casual. Riley's gut twisted. She scanned the terrain, noting how isolated they were from the rest of the team, how the trees formed a natural blind spot. This was it, the ambush she'd been expecting. Dalton turned to her with a cold smile. End of the line, Carter. As Briggs and Harlow flanked her, weapons raised, not with blanks this time but with cold, deadly intent, Riley realized the exercise had just turned into something far more dangerous than anyone else suspected. And for the first time, she knew she would have to unleash everything she had been holding back, no matter the cost. The forest was silent except for the whisper of wind through the branches and the steady pounding of Riley's heart. The darkness pressed in around them, broken only by the faint green glow of the night vision goggles strapped to her face. Dalton's silhouette loomed ahead, his broad shoulders tense, his weapon trained casually but deliberately in her direction. Briggs and Harlow moved to either side, forming a tight triangle that boxed her in completely. Their breathing was ragged with anticipation, and in that instant, Riley knew they weren't here to simulate a mission. This was an execution. Dalton's voice was low and cold, dripping with the venom of a grudge that had grown out of control. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," he said, his words cutting through the night like a blade. "You think you're better than me, Carter? You think you deserve to be here?" Riley didn't answer. She kept her breathing slow, her stance relaxed, giving no sign of the storm building inside her. Dalton took a step closer, his finger brushing the trigger. "You don't belong here. Women like you, hell, anyone like you, need to learn there are consequences for stepping out of line." Briggs snickered, tightening his grip on his rifle. Harlow cracked his knuckles, eager for violence. They were predators who thought they had cornered prey, but they didn't realize they were the ones about to be hunted. Riley's mind shifted into the state her father had drilled into her over years of relentless training. Assess, adapt, execute. Every sound, every movement, every detail registered with perfect clarity. Dalton's stance was aggressive but sloppy. His weight was too far forward, leaving his balance vulnerable. Briggs favored his right leg slightly, a sign of an old injury. Harlow's breathing was too fast, signaling nerves beneath his bravado. In less than a second, Riley calculated her path to victory. "Last chance," she said quietly, her voice like the calm before a storm. "Walk away." Dalton barked a harsh laugh. "Or what? You gonna cry to the instructors? No one's coming to save you out here." He raised his weapon fully, ready to fire the blank round that would still feel like a brutal hit at close range. Riley moved before he could blink. She dropped low, sweeping her leg in a precise arc that knocked Briggs off his feet. As he fell, she grabbed his rifle and twisted it free in a single fluid motion, then rolled to her feet and pivoted toward Harlow. He swung a heavy fist, but she slipped under it and drove the butt of the rifle into his stomach with controlled force. Harlow doubled over, gasping for air. Dalton shouted in rage, firing wildly, the muzzle flashes lighting up the trees like lightning. Riley zigzagged through the underbrush, never staying in one spot long enough to be hit. She closed the distance in a heartbeat and slammed into him with bone-jarring force, sending his rifle skidding across the ground. They grappled in the mud, Dalton using his size and strength to try to overpower her, but Riley's movements were precise and efficient. Every strike, every counter was a SEAL tactic executed flawlessly. She locked her legs around his torso, twisted his arm behind his back, and wrenched him into a submission hold that left him helpless. His breath came in ragged gasps, his face pressed into the cold earth. "You don't get to decide who belongs here," she hissed in his ear. "And you don't ever come after me again." Dalton spat mud, snarling like a trapped animal. "You think this ends with me? You're dead, Carter. You don't know who you're messing with." Riley tightened the hold just enough to cut off his words, then released him abruptly, shoving him face first into the dirt. She spun toward Briggs and Harlow, who were scrambling to their feet. Her eyes were cold, her body perfectly still except for the steady rise and fall of her chest. "Take him and go," she ordered. "If you don't, none of you will leave this forest standing." For a moment, Briggs hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear. Then he grabbed Dalton under the arms and dragged him backward, Harlow stumbling beside them. They disappeared into the darkness, their retreat clumsy and panicked. Riley stood alone, her breath forming pale clouds in the cold night air. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from the surge of adrenaline that always came after a fight. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to center herself. She had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Dalton wouldn't stop. If anything, his hatred would grow, and now he had proof that she wasn't just an ordinary recruit. Someone would notice. Someone always noticed. She retrieved her blank weapon and adjusted her gear, slipping seamlessly back into the role of the quiet, disciplined trainee. When she rejoined the rest of the team at the mock compound, no one suspected a thing. The instructors praised Dalton's team for completing their objective, completely unaware of the violence that had unfolded in the shadows. Back at base, the morning brought chaos. Dalton had clearly concocted a story overnight, because he marched into the commander's office with Briggs and Harlow at his side, all of them sporting bruises and scratches. Riley was summoned soon after. She entered the office calmly, standing at rigid attention as Dalton launched into a tirade about how she had gone rogue during the exercise, attacking her teammates and jeopardizing the mission. The commander, a stern-faced veteran named Captain Harrington, listened with narrowed eyes. When Dalton finished, Riley spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Sir, that account is false. During the exercise, Dalton deviated from the planned route. I attempted to correct him, but he became aggressive. I acted purely in self-defense and continued with the mission as instructed." Her words were measured, precise, giving nothing away. Harrington studied her for a long moment, then turned his gaze on Dalton. "Do you have any evidence of these allegations?" Dalton sputtered, clearly unprepared for the question. She attacked us. Look at the bruises." Harrington's expression didn't change. "Injuries prove there was a fight. They don't prove who started it. Until I have more than accusations, this matter is closed." Dalton's face turned red with fury, but he had no choice but to salute and storm out. Riley did the same, her expression neutral, but inside, her resolve hardened. She couldn't let Dalton control the narrative. Over the next week, Riley threw herself into training with relentless focus. She excelled in every task, from marksmanship to strategy drills, earning the grudging respect of some recruits and the suspicion of others. Dalton, meanwhile, grew more reckless. His frustration was palpable, and he began taking unnecessary risks during exercises, trying to goad her into making a mistake. Riley ignored him, but she knew it was only a matter of time before his obsession escalated. One evening, during a strategy briefing, Harrington announced the next phase of training. A live simulation involving multiple teams, real terrain, and high-stakes objectives. It would be the closest thing to actual combat they had faced so far. Riley felt a chill run through her. In a controlled environment, she could manage Dalton's attacks. But in the chaos of a large-scale simulation, anything could happen, and this time lives might truly be at risk. The night before the exercise, Riley sat alone on the edge of her bunk, staring at the small, worn pendant her father had given her before he died. It was a simple piece of metal etched with the seal insignia, a reminder of the legacy she carried. She whispered his old mantra under her breath: assess, adapt, execute. Her father had survived countless missions by living those words, and now she would do the same. But another memory surfaced: his warning about secrecy. "The moment they know what you are, you'll never be free again." Riley clenched the pendant in her fist. If she unleashed her full abilities during the upcoming simulation, there would be no going back. The instructors, the military, maybe even the government itself, they would want to know where she had learned those skills. And once they knew, they would never let her go. But if she held back, Dalton might succeed in getting someone killed. It was a terrible choice with no clear answer. At dawn, the recruits assembled on the tarmac, geared up for the simulation. Helicopters waited to ferry them to the training zone, their rotors chopping the cold morning air. Riley felt the weight of her decision settle over her like armor. She scanned the crowd, spotting Dalton across the formation. His eyes met hers, filled with malice and determination. Whatever he was planning, this was his final move. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them toward the vast wilderness that would be their battlefield, Riley closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them, the predator within was fully awake. If Dalton wanted a war, he was about to find out what it truly meant to fight someone trained in the deadly arts of the Navy SEALs. Riley returned to her barracks silently, every step calculated, her breathing slow, and even though her heart hammered in her chest, Dalton was alive. The knowledge weighed on her like a physical force, but it also sharpened her focus. If he was out there somewhere, injured but driven by hate, he wouldn't come back quietly. He would strike when the time was right, and if Briggs and Harlow were already plotting with him, the entire base would become a battlefield. She slid into her bunk without making a sound, staring at the ceiling in the dark while the other recruits snored softly around her. Memories of her father surged in her mind, the way he had taught her to read threats, to anticipate moves before they were made. "The enemy will always test you first, Riley," he had said during one grueling training session when she was only 12 years old. "They'll come at you from the shadows, probing for weaknesses. Your job isn't just to fight back, it's to know them better than they know themselves." She clenched her fists under the blanket. Dalton thought he was the hunter now, but he had no idea that Riley was already hunting him. The next morning, training resumed as though nothing had happened. The instructors were tighter-lipped than usual, clearly unsettled by Dalton's disappearance but unwilling to show weakness. They barked orders with extra ferocity, driving the recruits through a brutal series of endurance drills. Riley matched every command with silent precision, her movements efficient and controlled. She avoided Briggs and Harlow as much as possible, but she didn't miss the way they watched her every time she passed. Briggs's arm was in a sling, but his eyes burned with a cold, calculating hatred. Harlow's jaw was set, his posture tense like a predator ready to pounce. The other recruits seemed oblivious to the growing tension, but Riley felt it like an electric current under her skin. She knew that if she gave them even the slightest opening, they would exploit it. During a short break, Riley went to the armory under the pretense of checking her gear. In reality, she was scouting. If Dalton managed to sneak back onto the base, he would need weapons, and the armory was the most vulnerable point. She examined the racks of rifles and pistols, noting where the security cameras were positioned and where blind spots existed. The base was designed to keep outsiders out, not to stop someone who already knew its layout. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Chief Petty Officer Ramirez, one of the senior instructors. His sharp eyes narrowed as he studied her. "You're Carter, right?" he said, his tone unreadable. Riley snapped to attention. "Yes, sir." Ramirez crossed his arms, his gaze lingering on her mud-streaked boots and perfectly squared shoulders. "I've been hearing things about you. Impressive shooting skills. Exceptional obstacle course times. And yet, no prior military record." His voice hardened. "Where exactly did you learn to fight like that?" For a split second, Riley's pulse spiked, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Sir, I just train hard," she said evenly. Ramirez didn't look convinced. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "Keep your nose clean, Carter. There's something going on around here and I don't like surprises." With that, he walked away, leaving Riley tense and uneasy. Ramirez was sharp. If he started digging too deep, he might uncover the truth about her father and her past. That couldn't happen, not while Dalton was still at large. Later that evening, as the recruits marched back to their barracks, Riley's heightened senses picked up something unusual. The usual night noises of the forest, crickets, the rustle of wind through the trees, were interrupted by a faint metallic click. It was a sound she knew all too well, the slide of a rifle being cocked. Her muscles tightened instantly. She scanned the shadows, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Then she saw it, a brief glint of moonlight off a rifle barrel, positioned high in the trees near the perimeter fence. Dalton. It had to be him. He wasn't just hiding, he was already moving to strike. Riley's mind raced. If she sounded the alarm now, chaos would erupt and Dalton could vanish again. She needed proof, something concrete that would expose him before he could twist the narrative against her. She slipped away from the formation, moving like a ghost through the darkness. Every step was silent, every breath measured. As she approached the tree line, she saw Dalton's silhouette clearly. He was injured. His movements were slower, one leg dragging slightly, but his determination was undiminished. He scanned the base through a rifle scope, his face set in a mask of cold fury. Riley crouched behind a fallen log, weighing her options. If she attacked now, she might take him down, but Briggs and Harlow would simply claim she ambushed him out of revenge. She needed to catch him in the act. Suddenly, Dalton shifted his aim toward the main barracks. Riley's stomach dropped as she realized his target. He wasn't here for her. He was planning to create chaos by shooting a random recruit, making it look like an enemy infiltration, then using the panic to slip back into the base as a rescuer. The moment he fired, everything would spiral out of control. Riley didn't hesitate. She sprang from cover, closing the distance in 3 silent strides. Dalton spun just as she tackled him, the rifle discharging harmlessly into the air. They crashed to the ground, grappling fiercely. Dalton's face twisted with hatred. "You just don't quit, do you?" he snarled, trying to wrench the rifle free. Riley drove her knee into his wounded leg and he screamed, his grip loosening. She ripped the weapon away and tossed it into the underbrush. "You're done, Dalton," she hissed. "This ends tonight." But Dalton wasn't finished. With a roar of rage, he slammed his head forward, catching her off guard. Stars exploded behind Riley's eyes and she stumbled back. Dalton lunged, tackling her into the dirt. They rolled toward the edge of a shallow ravine, eerily similar to the one from their last fight. Memories surged in Riley's mind, fueling her determination. She locked her legs around his torso and twisted hard, using leverage to reverse their positions. Dalton's breath whooshed out as he hit the ground beneath her. She pinned his arms, her face inches from his. "You could have been a leader," she said through gritted teeth. "Instead you chose hate." Dalton spat in her face. "You don't belong here. None of this belongs to you." Before Riley could respond, a sharp whistle pierced the night. Flashlights flared in the distance. The instructors were coming. Dalton's eyes lit with sudden, desperate cunning. "Go ahead," he hissed. "Hit me. When they get here you'll be the monster, not me." Riley froze. If she incapacitated him now, with no witnesses to his actions, Briggs and Harlow would side with him, and her secret would be exposed. Thinking fast, she rolled away, snatching up the rifle. She pointed it at Dalton but didn't fire. When the instructors arrived seconds later, they saw exactly what she wanted them to see. Dalton on the ground, weaponless and defeated, Riley standing over him in control. Chief Ramirez pushed through the crowd, his expression thunderous. "What the hell is going on here?" Riley lowered the rifle slowly. "Sir, I intercepted Dalton before he could fire on the barracks," she said clearly, projecting calm authority. "I believe he intended to create a diversion and infiltrate the base." Dalton's face twisted in fury. "Lies," he screamed. "She attacked me. She's not even supposed to be here, she's some kind of freak." His wild accusations only made him look unstable. Ramirez studied both of them, his gaze sharp. Finally he barked, "Take Dalton into custody. We'll sort this out in the morning." As the instructors hauled Dalton away, he locked eyes with Riley, his expression a promise of vengeance. Briggs and Harlow were watching from the shadows, their faces unreadable. Riley knew this wasn't over. She had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. Back in her bunk, she lay awake, replaying every moment. Dalton was dangerous even in chains, and Briggs and Harlow would surely try to free him. Worse, Ramirez's suspicion of her was growing. She had protected her secret for years, but now the walls were closing in. Her father's training was no longer just a legacy, it was the only thing keeping her alive. She closed her eyes and made a silent vow. When the final confrontation came, she would be ready. There would be no more hiding, no more restraint. The next time Dalton came for her, she would end it once and for all. The cold dawn broke over the training base, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and gold, but Riley felt none of its warmth. She had spent the entire night lying awake, her mind locked in relentless focus, replaying the confrontation with Dalton over and over. Every detail mattered. His plan to create chaos, Briggs and Harlow lurking in the shadows, Chief Ramirez's sharp, suspicious gaze. Dalton was now locked in the base's temporary holding facility, under armed guard, but Riley knew that wouldn't last. A man like Dalton wouldn't just wait to be questioned. He would scheme, manipulate, and twist the situation to his advantage. Worse, Briggs and Harlow were still out there, free and silent, their hatred festering. She could feel the danger closing in on her like a tightening noose. As the morning assembly was called, Riley forced herself into perfect composure. No fear, no weakness. Her father's lessons echoed in her mind. When everyone is watching, be a ghost. Show them what you want them to see, nothing more. Chief Ramirez's voice rang out across the formation, harsh and unyielding. "Last night, one of your own betrayed his unit. Dalton is in custody pending investigation. This is a reminder that trust and discipline are not optional, they are the backbone of this program. Anyone caught undermining this team will face severe consequences." His eyes swept over the recruits like searchlights, lingering on Riley for a fraction of a second longer than anyone else. She kept her face neutral, her posture flawless, but inside, her pulse quickened. Ramirez wasn't just suspicious. He was watching her closely, looking for cracks in her facade. When the assembly ended, the recruits dispersed into smaller groups for their morning drills. Briggs and Harlow stayed close together, whispering to each other, their gazes darting toward Riley. She noticed subtle hand signals, a slight nod toward the direction of the holding facility. They were planning something and they weren't even trying to hide it from her. That meant they were confident, maybe even desperate. The day's training was brutal. Weighted runs, hand-to-hand combat sparring, live-fire drills. Every exercise designed to test the limits of body and mind. Riley excelled at each task, moving with precision and focus, but she didn't allow herself even a flicker of pride. Every success only made her a bigger target. During a sparring session, she was paired with Harlow. The moment their match began, he came at her with raw aggression, his punches fast and heavy. Riley deflected them effortlessly, using technique over brute strength, but she kept her movements subtle, careful not to reveal the full extent of her skills. When she finally took him down with a clean sweep, she held her hand out to help him up. Harlow slapped it away, his glare venomous. "Enjoy your little victories while you can," he muttered under his breath. Riley didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, her mind racing. Harlow's hostility was escalating. Whatever they were planning, it was happening soon. That night, Riley remained awake long after lights out, listening. The barracks were quiet, the steady rhythm of her fellow recruits' breathing blending with the distant hum of generators. Then, faintly, she heard it, a soft click, followed by the subtle creak of a door opening. Riley's eyes snapped open. She slipped silently from her bunk, moving with the same ghost-like precision her father had drilled into her since childhood. In the darkness, she saw two shadowy figures slipping out of the barracks, Briggs and Harlow. Her heartbeat slowed, her senses sharpening. This was it, their move to free Dalton. She followed at a distance, staying low and silent, using the cover of trees and buildings. The holding facility was at the far edge of the base, a small, heavily reinforced building with a single guard posted outside. Riley crouched behind a stack of supply crates, watching as Briggs approached the guard, feigning casual conversation. Harlow circled behind, moving like a predator. In a flash, Harlow struck, wrapping an arm around the guard's throat and dragging him into the shadows. The guard didn't even have time to cry out. Riley's stomach clenched, but she didn't move. Not yet. She needed to see exactly what they planned. Briggs produced a keycard and swiped it at the door, clearly stolen during the day. The heavy metal door swung open and Dalton emerged. His face was gaunt, his eyes burning with unhinged fury, but his movements were controlled. He embraced Briggs and Harlow briefly, then gestured sharply toward the base interior. "We do this now," he hissed. "Before they know what's coming." Riley's mind raced. If Dalton escaped into the base, he could sabotage equipment, steal weapons, even take hostages. She couldn't let that happen, but if she confronted them alone, there would be no witnesses to prove their guilt. She needed Ramirez to see the truth with his own eyes. Moving quickly but silently, Riley retraced her steps to the barracks. She slipped inside and shook one of the lighter sleepers awake, a recruit named Jensen who was known for his loyalty to the program. "Emergency," she whispered urgently. "Get Chief Ramirez now. Tell him there's a breach at the holding facility. Go." Jensen didn't hesitate. He bolted upright and sprinted off while Riley returned to shadow Dalton's group. By the time she reached the holding facility again, Dalton and his men were moving through the forest toward the armory. Riley followed, her breath steady, her muscles coiled. She needed to delay them long enough for Ramirez to arrive. The perfect opportunity came when they reached a narrow bridge over a drainage canal. Riley moved into position ahead of them, hidden by the dense underbrush. As Dalton led his men onto the bridge, Riley hurled a rock into the opposite trees. The noise drew their attention for a split second, long enough for her to leap from hiding and kick the bridge's support cable loose. The structure tilted violently, sending Briggs and Harlow crashing into the shallow water below. Dalton managed to cling to the railing, snarling in rage. Riley landed in a crouch, blocking his path. "It's over, Dalton," she said, her voice low and cold. "You're done running." Dalton laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You still don't get it, do you? This whole place is a lie. They don't care about you, Carter. You're just a pawn. Me. I'm the only one willing to fight back." He lunged at her, his movements wild but powerful. Riley met him head-on, their fight a brutal dance of speed and strength. Dalton's raw aggression clashed with Riley's precise, calculated technique. She ducked under a swing, countered with a strike to his ribs, then pivoted to avoid his follow-up attack. Each move was a test, a battle not just of bodies but of wills. Briggs and Harlow scrambled back onto the bridge, charging to aid Dalton. Riley's instincts screamed danger. She vaulted over the railing, using the narrow edge as leverage to spin and kick both men back into the water with a single, powerful move. As they floundered, Dalton roared in frustration and tackled her. They crashed to the ground, rolling through mud and leaves. Dalton's hands closed around her throat, squeezing with relentless fury. Spots danced before Riley's eyes, but she forced herself to remember her father's final lesson: when you can't overpower, outthink. She went limp for a split second, tricking Dalton into loosening his grip, then drove her thumbs into the nerve cluster at his wrist. His hands spasmed open and she surged upward, slamming him onto his back. Flashlights blazed suddenly, cutting through the darkness. Chief Ramirez and a squad of armed instructors stormed into the clearing. "Freeze!" Ramirez barked. Dalton's face contorted in shock as rifles were trained on him. Briggs and Harlow were dragged from the canal, sputtering and cursing. Riley stepped back, hands raised to show she wasn't resisting. Dalton tried to twist the narrative one last time. "She's lying," he shouted. "She set this up. She's dangerous, she's not one of us." His wild ranting only sealed his fate. Ramirez's gaze moved from Dalton to Riley, then to the evidence: the subdued guard, the stolen keycard, the chaos Dalton's team had left in their wake. Slowly Ramirez nodded. Take them into custody. All of them. As Dalton was dragged away, he locked eyes with Riley, his expression a mask of pure venom. This isn't over, he hissed. You can't hide what you are forever. Riley didn't respond. She simply stood in the circle of light, her breathing steady, her heart calm despite the storm raging inside. For now she had won. But Dalton's words lingered, a chilling reminder that her greatest battle was still ahead. Ramirez approached, his face unreadable. Carter, he said quietly, we need to talk. Alone. Riley nodded, bracing herself. She had just exposed Dalton's treachery, but in doing so she had drawn Ramirez's full attention. And she knew that if he dug too deep into her past, the truth about her father, and the Navy SEAL tactics she carried within her, would change everything. The cold fluorescent lights of Chief Ramirez's office cast sharp shadows across the Spartan room as Riley stood at rigid attention, her damp fatigue still clinging to her skin from the night's battle. Every muscle in her body ached, but she forced herself to appear calm and unshaken. Ramirez sat behind a heavy steel desk, his arms folded, his dark eyes studying her with the intensity of a predator analyzing prey. The silence stretched until it felt suffocating. Finally he spoke, his voice low but edged with steel. You expect me to believe you just happened to stumble upon Dalton's escape attempt at the perfect moment? Riley kept her gaze locked straight ahead. No, sir. I followed my instincts. Dalton's behavior didn't add up, and when I noticed Briggs and Harlow sneaking out, I knew something was wrong. I acted because there wasn't time to wait for orders. Ramirez's eyes narrowed slightly. You acted alone. Again. And somehow you managed to subdue 3 armed men without so much as a scratch. That's not standard training, Carter. That's something else. Riley's heartbeat quickened, but she didn't let it show. She'd known this moment was coming, the point where her skills would draw too much attention to explain away. Carefully she crafted her answer. I grew up in a military family, sir. My father was strict. He believed preparation was everything. He taught me techniques, drills, survival tactics. It's the only way I know how to operate. Ramirez leaned back, his expression unreadable. Your file says your father was a mechanic on a Navy base. Riley's throat tightened. Yes, sir. That's what he did officially. A flicker of something, recognition, maybe suspicion, crossed Ramirez's face. He stood, moving to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Carter, I don't like mysteries. This program doesn't like mysteries. Whatever you're hiding, it had better not endanger this unit. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Riley said, her voice steady even as unease twisted inside her. Ramirez turned back to face her, his tone sharp again. For now, Dalton and his lackeys are being transferred to a secure military prison. But their actions have left this program vulnerable. Trust has been shattered, and our enemies will exploit that weakness if they can. I need to know that you're on this team's side. Riley met his gaze, letting conviction fill her voice. I am, sir. Whatever it takes. Ramirez studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. Good. Because starting tomorrow the training intensifies. No more games, no more mistakes. If you have any ghosts haunting you, Carter, you'd better exorcise them fast. Dismissed. As Riley left the office, the cool night air hit her face like a splash of water, grounding her. She walked past the barracks where the other recruits were whispering rumors about the night's events. Some looked at her with admiration, others with suspicion, but none dared speak to her directly. She was becoming an enigma, and that was dangerous. She slipped away to a secluded corner of the base, where an old obstacle course lay abandoned. It was here, under the cover of darkness, that she allowed her carefully controlled facade to crack. Dropping to her knees, she closed her eyes and let memories flood in, her father's voice, calm and commanding, teaching her how to fight, how to think, how to survive. The world will never fight fair, Riley, he had told her. So you don't fight fair either. You fight to win no matter the cost. Her father hadn't been just a mechanic. He had been part of an elite Navy SEAL unit, operating under deep cover. When a mission went wrong, his name was erased from official records, leaving him a ghost. He had raised Riley in secrecy, passing on every skill he possessed. But he had also warned her to never reveal her lineage. If they know what you are, they'll either use you or destroy you. That warning haunted her now more than ever. Dalton's cryptic words echoed in her mind. You can't hide what you are forever. Was it possible he knew the truth? Or had he merely sensed that she was different? Either way, Ramirez's growing suspicion was a ticking time bomb. The next morning, the recruits were roused before dawn and driven to a remote training ground deep in the forest. Ramirez addressed them with a severity that left no room for interpretation. From this point forward, your training will simulate real combat conditions. Fail and you don't just wash out, you risk serious injury or worse. Consider this your crucible. Only the strongest will come out the other side. The first exercise was a brutal endurance test, a 20-mile run through rugged terrain with full packs, followed immediately by a live-fire obstacle course. Riley kept pace effortlessly, her breathing measured, while others faltered around her. Briggs and Harlow's absence was noted but not mentioned aloud. Their betrayal hung over the group like a storm cloud. As Riley climbed a cliff face near the midpoint of the run, she noticed Jensen, a recruit who had helped her alert Ramirez, struggling with his grip. Without hesitation, she doubled back, locking her arm around his and hauling him up to safety. "Don't stop," she urged. "We keep moving." Jensen gave her a grateful, exhausted nod, and they pushed on together. By the time they reached the obstacle course, Riley's muscles burned, but her mind was razor-sharp. Explosions rocked the ground as smoke and blaring alarms simulated battlefield chaos. She moved through it like a phantom, her instincts guiding her past traps and ambush points. Ramirez watched from a control tower, his gaze fixed on her. She could feel it, a weight pressing between her shoulder blades. When the exercise ended hours later, several recruits were too exhausted to stand. Riley remained upright, her uniform streaked with mud and sweat but her posture unwavering. Ramirez descended from the tower and addressed the group. "You've taken your first step toward becoming more than recruits. You're becoming warriors. But don't get comfortable. The next phase will be even harsher." His eyes locked on Riley. "Some of you are already ahead of the curve. Others have a lot to prove." The unspoken message was clear. He was talking about her. That night, as the recruits slept in tents near the training ground, Riley lay awake, listening to the forest. Every crack of a branch, every distant rustle put her on edge. She wasn't just worried about the grueling trials ahead, she was worried about Dalton. Even locked away, he had resources, allies. She remembered the way he had looked at her as he was dragged away, the promise of revenge burning in his eyes. And she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was out there, watching, waiting for her to slip. Her fears were confirmed when, deep into the night, a shadow moved silently between the tents. Riley's eyes snapped open. She rolled soundlessly from her cot, crouching low, and spotted a dark figure slipping toward the supply tent. Moving with predatory grace, she stalked the intruder, every step measured. When the figure paused to cut open a crate, Riley struck, tackling them to the ground in a fluid motion. A brief struggle ensued before she pinned the intruder, her forearm pressed against their throat. The dim moonlight revealed a face she recognized, a recruit named Avery, known for being quiet and unassuming. "What are you doing here?" Riley hissed. Avery's eyes were wide with fear. "I didn't have a choice," he gasped. "Dalton has people outside the base. They told me if I didn't plant this." He gestured weakly toward the crate, where a small explosive device lay half-hidden. "They'd come after my family." Riley's stomach dropped. Dalton's reach extended beyond the base. She quickly disarmed the device, then hauled Avery to his feet. "Listen to me," she said urgently. "If Dalton has allies out there, we're all in danger. But you don't have to face this alone. Tell Ramirez everything." Avery shook his head violently. "No. You won't believe me. He'll think I'm lying, just like Dalton tried to say about you." Riley clenched her jaw. He was right, Ramirez's trust was fragile at best. Suddenly, the night erupted with distant gunfire. Shouts rang out as alarms blared through the camp. Riley's instincts kicked into overdrive. She shoved Avery toward the tents. "Get everyone awake and ready to move. Go." As Avery ran, Riley sprinted toward the source of the gunfire, her mind racing. Dalton wasn't just a memory anymore. He was coming back, and this time he wasn't alone. The true battle was about to begin, and Riley knew that if she didn't stop him now, the entire program, and everyone in it, would be destroyed. The forest erupted into chaos as the sharp crack of gunfire split the night air, followed by panicked shouting from the recruits stumbling out of their tents. Riley sprinted through the darkness, her boots pounding against the dirt, every muscle in her body honed to razor-sharp focus. The smell of smoke hit her first, acrid and heavy, followed by the sight of a supply truck engulfed in flames near the edge of the training ground. Figures in dark combat gear moved like wraiths between the trees, firing controlled bursts toward the camp. This wasn't a drill. This was a coordinated attack, one that had Dalton's signature written all over it. Riley dove behind an overturned crate as bullets tore through the air above her. Her breathing slowed, her pulse steady despite the danger. She'd been in situations like this before, training with her father under the most extreme conditions imaginable. But those had been simulations, private lessons in secrecy. This was real, and the lives of every recruit here were on the line. Ramirez's voice cut through the din, sharp and commanding. Form a perimeter. Return fire and hold your positions. He emerged from the command tent with a rifle slung over his shoulder, barking orders to the instructors scrambling to rally the panicked recruits. Riley peeked out from cover, scanning the attackers. There were at least a dozen of them, moving with the precision of trained operatives. These weren't random mercenaries, they were soldiers, possibly former military. Dalton had clearly been busy since his capture, gathering allies and resources. And if he was here leading them, his objective wouldn't just be sabotage. He wanted to destroy the program completely and expose Riley in the process. Riley's mind worked at lightning speed. The camp's defenses weren't built for this level of assault. If they stayed pinned down, they'd be overrun within minutes. She needed to turn the tide fast. Moving low and silent, she slipped from her position and flanked the attackers, using the thick underbrush as cover. Every step was measured, every movement a ghost-like blur. She closed in on the nearest enemy, a man crouched behind a tree while reloading his weapon. With a fluid motion, she struck, her arms snaking around his throat in a chokehold. He didn't even have time to cry out before collapsing. She stripped his rifle and earpiece, slipping into his place seamlessly. Through the earpiece, she heard Dalton's voice, chillingly calm amidst the chaos. Push them back toward the river. Herd them into the open. Carter will try to outmaneuver us. Don't give her the chance. Hearing her name sent a jolt through Riley's veins. Dalton wasn't just attacking the camp, he was hunting her specifically. She couldn't let fear control her. She keyed the earpiece and spoke in a perfect imitation of the man she'd just taken down. Copy that. Moving forward. With this disguise, she began feeding false information to Dalton's squad, subtly redirecting their movements while simultaneously picking them off one by one. Her tactics caused confusion among the attackers, buying precious time for Ramirez to organize a counteroffensive. But as effective as her strategy was, it couldn't last. Dalton was too smart to be deceived for long. Meanwhile, back at the camp, Avery was doing as she'd ordered, rallying the recruits and helping Ramirez form defensive positions. Jensen found Riley's abandoned pack near the edge of the forest and realized she'd gone after the attackers alone. "Chief," he shouted over the chaos. "Carter's out there by herself." Ramirez's jaw tightened. He didn't have time to debate whether Riley was a hero or a liability. "Hold this line," he barked to the others. "I'll bring her back." With that, he plunged into the forest, rifle ready. For the first time, Riley wasn't just being watched by Ramirez, he was actively coming to her aid. But she didn't know it yet. Deeper in the forest, Riley finally caught sight of Dalton. He stood at the center of a clearing, issuing commands with icy precision. His face was partially obscured by a tactical mask, but his eyes burned with unmistakable hatred. Riley crouched behind a fallen log, studying his formation. He had 4 men guarding him closely, with others spread out in a wide perimeter. Taking him down directly would be suicidal. She needed to break his chain of command first. Slowly, she crept closer, picking off isolated guards with surgical precision. Each takedown was silent, efficient, a ghost slipping through the darkness. But just as she prepared to strike again, a branch snapped underfoot. Dalton's head whipped around instantly. "She's here," he roared. "Carter's here. Close ranks." Gunfire erupted, forcing Riley to dive for cover as bullets shredded the trees around her. She returned fire, dropping 2 of Dalton's men, but now her position was compromised. Dalton advanced with predatory determination, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You think you can hide from me, Riley? You're just like your father, always playing the ghost, never facing the truth." The mention of her father made Riley's blood run cold. Dalton knew. Somehow, he had uncovered her deepest secret, the one thing she couldn't allow to come to light. "You don't know anything about him," she shouted back, her voice raw. Dalton laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Oh, I know enough. He was a traitor hiding behind the Navy SEAL name. And now you carry his shame." Rage surged through Riley, hot and blinding. She moved with a burst of speed, flanking Dalton's position and engaging his guards in brutal close-quarters combat. The fight was vicious, every strike and counter fueled by raw emotion. She broke one man's arm with a precise joint lock, then spun to disarm another, using his own knife against him. When the last guard fell, Dalton was waiting, a pistol in his hand. "You should have joined me, Riley," he sneered. "We could have burned this corrupt system to the ground." Riley stood tall, breathing hard but steady. "The only thing getting burned tonight is your operation." Dalton fired, but she was already moving, diving to the side and rolling behind cover. The bullet grazed her shoulder, pain flaring white-hot, but she didn't slow. Using the techniques her father had taught her, she read Dalton's movements, predicting his next attack. When he lunged, she sidestepped and struck, driving her elbow into his jaw with bone-crushing force. As Dalton staggered, Ramirez burst into the clearing, rifle raised. "Drop it, Dalton," he commanded. For a split second, Dalton hesitated, but then he grabbed Riley, yanking her in front of him as a human shield. "Stay back, Chief, or she dies," Dalton snarled. Riley's mind raced. She couldn't overpower him directly, not like this. Instead, she went limp, just as she had during their previous fight, making Dalton think he had complete control. The moment his grip loosened slightly, she twisted violently, breaking free and slamming her palm into his wrist. The pistol flew from his hand, and Ramirez fired a single, precise shot that dropped Dalton to his knees. Dalton glared up at Riley, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You think this ends with me?" he spat. "There are others. They know what you are. They'll come for you." His words sent a chill through Riley, but she refused to show fear. "Then I'll be ready," she said coldly. Ramirez moved in, cuffing Dalton while keeping his rifle trained on the treeline. "We need to get back to camp. There could be more of them." Riley nodded, but her mind was already spinning. Dalton's attack had been just the beginning. If there were others like him, if they truly knew about her father's past, then the danger was far from over. As they returned to camp, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting the battlefield in shades of gray and crimson. The camp was battered but intact, the recruits shaken yet alive. Avery approached Riley hesitantly, his face pale. "You saved us," he said quietly. Riley shook her head. "We saved each other. But this isn't over." Ramirez overheard her, his expression grim. "She's right. Dalton's network is bigger than we thought. From here on out, we operate at full alert." His gaze shifted to Riley, his voice low and serious. "And you, Carter, you're going to tell me everything about where you learned to fight like that. No more secrets." Riley met his eyes, the weight of her father's legacy pressing down on her. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but she also knew that revealing the truth could change everything, not just for her but for the entire program. Before she could respond, a distant explosion echoed through the forest, followed by the faint, chilling sound of a helicopter's rotors. Dalton's allies weren't retreating. They were escalating. Riley squared her shoulders, her jaw set. "We don't have time to talk," she said. "The real war is just beginning." And as the recruits scrambled to defensive positions once more, Riley felt the full force of her father's teachings rise within her. Whatever came next, she would face it head-on, not as a ghost, but as a warrior forged in shadows, ready to unleash every ounce of power she possessed. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades grew louder, vibrating through the trees and rattling the ground beneath Riley's boots. Dawn's light was barely strong enough to cut through the swirling smoke that blanketed the camp, painting the scene in an eerie mix of orange and gray. Riley's heart pounded, but not from fear. This was the moment she had been preparing for her entire life, the point where every lesson her father had drilled into her, every sacrifice she had made, would be tested in the crucible of real battle. The recruits were scrambling into defensive positions, panic etched into their faces. Chief Ramirez barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos like a whip. "Secure the perimeter. Heavy weapons to the north side. I want every recruit armed and ready to fire." His eyes locked on Riley, sharp and demanding. "Carter, you're with me. If this is Dalton's backup force, they'll be coming hard and fast. We stop them here or we don't stop them at all." Riley nodded, grabbing a rifle and extra magazines from a nearby crate. Her shoulders still throbbed from the graze of Dalton's bullet, but she pushed the pain aside. As she moved into position beside Ramirez, she scanned the treeline, her instincts screaming warnings. This wasn't just an attack, it was a calculated strike meant to finish what Dalton started. Through the thinning smoke, she saw dark figures rappelling down from the hovering helicopter. These soldiers were even more organized than the last wave, their black tactical gear and silent precision marking them as professionals. "These aren't Dalton's men," Riley murmured almost to herself. "This is bigger." Ramirez glanced at her sharply. "What do you mean bigger? Who are they?" Riley didn't answer, not fully. She couldn't, Not yet. If she told Ramirez the truth about her father's past and the shadowy network he had been part of, it would shatter everything. For now all she could do was fight. The first burst of gunfire came like a thunderclap. Bullets ripped through the camp's outer barricades, sending recruits diving for cover. Riley returned fire with controlled precision, dropping 2 attackers before they even reached the ground. Around her, the recruits struggled to maintain their composure, fear threatening to overwhelm their training. "Focus," she shouted, her voice cutting through the din. Short, controlled bursts. "Watch your sectors." They responded instinctively, her calm authority steadying their nerves. Ramirez shot her a look of surprise but didn't question it. Whatever Riley's past was, right now she was the only thing keeping this unit from collapsing. The enemy advanced with ruthless efficiency, pressing toward the camp's center. Riley's mind raced, analyzing their movements. They weren't just trying to wipe out the recruits. They were pushing toward the communications tower at the heart of the base. If they took it, they could cut off all outside contact, leaving the camp completely isolated. "They want the tower," Riley realized aloud. Ramirez cursed under his breath. "If they take that, we're dead. Carter, take a team and hold it at all costs." Riley didn't hesitate. She grabbed Jensen, Avery, and 3 other recruits, leading them in a sprint across the camp under heavy fire. Avery's hands trembled as he clutched his rifle. "Riley, I'm not ready for this," he gasped. Riley glanced back at him, her voice firm but reassuring. "You are. Remember what I said, you don't fight fair, you fight to win. Stay close to me." As they neared the tower, an explosion rocked the ground, throwing them off their feet. Dirt and smoke filled the air as enemy soldiers emerged through the haze, firing wildly. Riley rolled to her knees and engaged instantly, her movements a blur of lethal precision. She dropped 3 enemies in rapid succession, using the chaos to close the distance. When one attacker lunged at her with a knife, she sidestepped smoothly, using his momentum to flip him over her shoulder and slam him into the dirt. Jensen and the others covered her flanks, their confidence growing as they followed her lead. Together they formed a defensive ring around the tower, holding back wave after wave of attackers. In the midst of the battle, Riley caught sight of a familiar figure emerging from the treeline. Her blood ran cold. It was Dalton. He moved with deliberate calm, a pistol in one hand and a radio in the other. Somehow he had escaped custody during the chaos. His voice rang out over the battlefield, amplified by the radio speaker. "Carter," he shouted, his tone mocking. "You can't win this. No matter how many you kill, more will come. You think Ramirez and his precious program will protect you? They'll turn on you the second they learn the truth about what you are." Riley gritted her teeth, refusing to let his words shake her. "Ignore him," she ordered her team. "Focus on the fight." But inside her heart twisted. Dalton wasn't wrong. If Ramirez discovered her true heritage, everything could unravel. Dalton raised his hand, and the enemy soldiers shifted tactics, converging on Riley's position with frightening coordination. It was clear now she wasn't just defending the tower. She was the target. "Fall back." Ramirez's voice roared through her earpiece. "Get out of there, Carter. We'll cover you." But Riley knew retreat wasn't an option. If she left, Dalton would seize the tower and slaughter anyone left behind. This was her fight and she had to finish it. She turned to Jensen and Avery. "Hold this position no matter what. If I don't come back, you lead the others." "Understood." Jensen's eyes widened. "Riley, no." "Understood," she barked. Reluctantly he nodded. Riley broke from cover, moving like a phantom through the smoke. Her world narrowed to a single objective, Dalton. She weaved through enemy fire, using every scrap of cover, every ounce of skill her father had taught her. One by one she cut down Dalton's guards until only the 2 of them remained. Dalton watched her approach, a twisted smile on his face. "There she is," he sneered. "The ghost's daughter. You've been hiding your true self for so long, but it's over now. Everyone will see what you really are." Riley circled him, her body coiled like a spring. "The only thing they'll see is you going down," she said coldly. The fight exploded into motion. Dalton attacked with feral intensity, his strikes wild but brutally strong. Riley met him head-on, her movements precise and devastating. Every lesson her father had ever taught her came alive in that moment. She ducked under a vicious swing, driving her knee into his ribs, then spun to land a crushing elbow strike to his jaw. Dalton staggered but didn't fall. "You can't stop this," he snarled. "Even if you kill me, others will take my place." Riley's eyes blazed with determination. "Then I'll take them down too," she growled. With a final, explosive burst of speed, she disarmed him and locked him in a chokehold, cutting off his air. "This ends now," Dalton thrashed, then went limp, unconscious. As she dragged Dalton's body into the open, Ramirez and a squad of recruits arrived, their faces a mix of awe and confusion. Riley dropped Dalton at Ramirez's feet. "He's alive," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "But this was bigger than him. There's a network out there and they know about me. They won't stop." Ramirez's gaze was intense, almost searching. "Then you'd better start talking, Carter. No more secrets." Riley met his eyes, her decision made. "My father was a Navy SEAL operating under deep cover. When his mission went wrong, they erased him from the records. He trained me in secret, made me what I am. Dalton knew about him, about me. That's why he targeted this program." The recruits stared, stunned into silence. Ramirez processed her words, then finally nodded. "That explains a lot. And it means we have a bigger fight ahead of us." He turned to the others. "Get Dalton secured. Double the perimeter. We move at first light." As the recruits scrambled to obey, Riley stood apart, watching the sunrise break over the battlefield. She felt the weight of her father's legacy pressing down on her, but also a sense of clarity. Dalton had been right about one thing: she couldn't hide forever. But she could fight. And she would. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the smoke, Riley tightened her grip on her rifle and whispered to herself, "They think they know me. They have no idea." With Ramirez at her side and the recruits rallying behind her, she turned toward the horizon, ready to face whatever came next. The ghosts of her past had been unleashed, but now she was no longer running. She was hunting. The end.